Ever wondered what forgiveness really looked like way back in Old Testament times?
Yeah.
Back when people messed up big time, like really messed up.
Yeah.
Well, today we're using Rod Goodall's book, God's Mercy,
Okay.
to explore this through the life of a guy you've definitely heard of, King David.
Right.
Turns out, even heroes, well, they have their share of learning opportunities.
Yeah, you could say that again. What's so striking about the Old Testament, especially in light of what we'll be unpacking from God's mercy, is just how seriously they took sin back then. It
Yeah.
wasn't something you could just brush off. Not at all.
I can imagine things were a tad different back then.
Oh, absolutely.
But for those of us who haven't exactly cracked open the Old Testament lately, could you maybe paint us a picture? How strict are we talking here?
Okay, so imagine a world, right, where even something we might consider, I don't know, like slip of the tongue today, like say, getting a little too passionate about your favorite sports team, invoking God's name, in anger.
Okay.
That could land you in some serious hot water.
Wait, really? Like
Yeah.
more than just a stern talking to from a coach?
Oh, we're talking way more than that. We're talking capital punishment level serious here.
Wow.
The ultimate price for something we might barely even bat an eye at today.
That's intense.
And if that seems intense, adultery, well, that was in a whole other league of its own. It carried the same weight, death, no exceptions.
No exceptions. Wow. That definitely raises the stakes a bit,
It does.
which makes the story we're about to dive into even more, shall we say, interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Because the man at the heart of it is none other than King David. Harp playing, giant slaying, ancestor of Jesus David.
A man who, you're right, despite his legendary status, found himself caught in a web of sin.
Yeah,
The consequences of which, they could have easily cost him his kingdom.
easily.
Yeah.
And he messed up big time, like epically.
Yep.
So to set the stage for everyone, we're talking about the story of David and Bathsheba.
Right.
David, at the height of his power, sees Bathsheba bathing one evening. And, well, he's captivated.
And, it's crucial to remember this isn't just a fleeting glance. David knows she's married. He knows this, and yet he still chooses to act on his desires.
Right.
He summons Bathsheba, and she becomes pregnant.
And if that wasn't bad enough, he tries to cover it all up.
Yeah.
He sends her husband, Uriah, to the front lines of battle, essentially a guarantee he won't be coming back.
It was a calculated, cold-hearted decision.
Yeah.
And it directly violated the very laws that he was supposed to uphold as king.
Right.
So let's be crystal clear here. According to the rules of the time, David was guilty on multiple counts. Adultery, check. Murder. Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
This wasn't just a minor misstep. Okay, this was a scandal of epic proportions.
Right.
The kind of scandal that could have brought down his entire reign.
And yet, this is where it gets really, really interesting.
It does.
Because despite it all, despite the law demanding his very life, God forgives David.
And not because of some legal loophole or technicality. David doesn't weasel his way out of this one. No, this is pure, unmerited grace.
Wow.
The book really emphasizes this and even highlights the specific Hebrew words used to describe God's mercy. Words that really paint a picture of God's deep, unwavering love.
Okay, so we've got this incredibly harsh system of laws, a king who commits this awful act, and then, boom, divine pardon.
Yeah.
There's a lot to wrap your head around. So where do we even begin to unpack all of this? What are we living thousands of years later? What are we supposed to take away from this ancient story?
That's the question, isn't it? What does this ancient story have to do with us today?
Well, I think that's the power of David's story, because despite being a king, he's incredibly relatable.
Okay.
In Psalm 51, which was written right after his sin comes to light, he doesn't try to justify his actions or make excuses.
Yeah.
No, it's this raw, vulnerable plea for forgiveness. He owns up to his mistakes, and he throws himself on the mercy of God.
It's easy to look back at a story like this and think, well, I haven't committed adultery or anything even close to it, so I'm good, right?
But that need for forgiveness, for a second chance, isn't that something we've all felt at some point in our lives?
Absolutely. We may not be kings facing, execution or anything,
Right.
but we all have those moments, those moments we'd like to take back.
Yeah.
Times we've made choices that have hurt others, hurt ourselves. And David's story, I think, as extreme as it seems, it reminds us that God's grace, it has this incredible capacity to meet us even in those really messy places. It's
Yeah.
bigger than our mistakes, bigger than our regrets.
So it's not about being perfect, but about being real with ourselves and with God.
Exactly. And that's a really important point because this doesn't mean we have like a free pass to just go about life doing whatever we want because, hey, grace will just take care of it, right?
Right.
The book is very clear on this. God's mercy isn't about avoiding the consequences of our actions. It's not about taking advantage.
So where does that leave us then? What's the missing piece here?
Well, I think the key is this idea of a broken spirit that David embodies in Psalm 51. He's not just trying to get off the hook,
Yeah.
He's truly sorry. And you really see this desire for genuine change in his heart.
So it's more than just saying sorry and moving on.
Yeah, it's about recognizing the weight of our actions, taking responsibility, and having that deep desire to really become better. It's about rebuilding what was broken by our choices. And the book even talks about this idea of walls being rebuilt after sin.
Walls being rebuilt.
Yeah.
That's a powerful image. I mean, when you think about it, like when we break trust, when relationships are damaged, it takes real effort to rebuild them. It's not something that just magically happens overnight.
Right. You can't just wish the damage away. It takes time, it takes effort, and it takes a willingness to do the work, brick by brick, to rebuild those walls, whether they're walls within ourselves, walls between us and God, or walls between us and others.
So it sounds like forgiveness isn't just about wiping the slate clean, but about this opportunity to create something new and stronger in those broken places.
Yeah, you got it. And that's the beauty of it all. It reminds us that as huge as our mistakes might seem, they don't define us. There's always room for growth, for change, for rebuilding.
This has really got me thinking. So we've got this ancient law, a king's betrayal, divine mercy. What's the takeaway for, the average person listening to this right now?
I think David's story ultimately reminds us that it's not about striving for some unattainable standard of perfection.
Yeah.
It's about being real with ourselves and with God,
All right.
about facing our shortcomings with honesty and humility.
Instead of trying to pretend those oops moments never happened, it's about owning them, learning from them, and allowing ourselves to be changed by them.
Exactly. And that process of change, that's what resonates even thousands of years later.
Yeah.
It's a process that's relevant to all of us, regardless of our backgrounds or beliefs.
This reminds me of a time when I really messed up with a close friend. And I let my ego get in the way.
Yeah, yeah.
And I said some things that I really regretted later.
Yeah.
And it took a lot of soul searching
Yeah.
and a lot of awkward conversations, to rebuild that trust.
Right.
It wasn't easy, but that experience really showed me the power of just owning up to your mistakes.
Yeah,
And just being willing to put in the work to make things right.
absolutely.
It's amazing how those personal rebuilding moments, even when they're painful, can teach us so much about ourselves and about forgiveness, isn't it?
It really is.
It really is.
Yeah.
But let's talk more about what this whole process looks like.
Okay.
The book goes, a bit deeper, right?
It does.
There's this whole other layer about sacrifice
Yeah.
and what it really means in the context of forgiveness.
Right. And this is where it gets even more interesting.
Okay.
See, the book, it talks about how David realized that God wasn't looking for some big, showy display of repentance.
Okay.
It wasn't about going through the motions of religious rituals or offering up, bigger and better sacrifices.
So it's not about checking off boxes on some cosmic to-do list to get back in God's good graces.
Not at all.
Okay.
In fact, there's this really powerful moment in Psalm 51 where David actually says, "You do not delight in sacrifice, or I would bring it. You do not take pleasure in burnt offerings."
Wow.
And what David realized is that God desired something far deeper, something more profound, a sacrifice of a broken spirit.
Okay, so what does that even mean for us today?
Yes, right.
What does a sacrifice of a broken spirit look like in our modern lives? It's not like we're offering up animals on altars anymore.
You're right. It's not about literal sacrifices anymore. It's
Right.
about really looking inward, confronting those parts of ourselves that led us to make those mistakes in the first place. It's about being willing to let go,
Okay.
to let go of pride, selfishness, or whatever it might be that's standing in the way of real change. That's the real sacrifice.
It's like saying, I'm not just offering up words. I'm willing to change. I'm willing to let go of the things in me that caused this hurt.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, that can be a tough process.
Right.
It takes courage to be that honest with ourselves, to
Yeah.
be that vulnerable.
Right.
But it's in that space of brokenness, of genuine humility, that we often find the greatest potential for growth and transformation.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into God's mercy and forgiveness, it feels like we're left with this powerful message of hope, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
It's not about being perfect. It's about being real.
Yeah.
It's about acknowledging our need for grace
Okay.
and allowing that to change us from the inside out.
Beautifully said. And that's a message that resonates just as strongly today as it did thousands of years ago.
It really does.
Yeah.
It really does.
Yeah.
So to everyone listening, the next time you find yourself facing a Bathsheba moment, whether it's, a major life decision or just a small act of unkindness, remember this. It's not about being flawless. It's about being real.
Right.
It's about facing our shortcomings with honesty and humility and remembering that even in those moments when we feel most unworthy, there's a wellspring of grace waiting for us. We just have to be willing to meet ourselves and God in that space of brokenness and allow the rebuilding to begin.
And in that rebuilding, we often find something even stronger, even more beautiful than what was there before.
What a powerful thought to leave us with.
Yeah.
Until next time, keep diving deep, friends.